G'day, how are you? Welcome again to Riverview Live. Hope you've been enjoying the show. If you'd like an update on where Phil's at, you can check it out on riverviewchurch.com or on philbaker.net. We've been introducing some new speakers, and one of those has been Hayden Nelson, aka Haiti Babes. Hope you've been enjoying him and his messages. This week he's looking at a hero of the faith, Timothy, and he's starting off with his first point: faith transcends age. So I hope you enjoy this message, and it's really encouraging. Check it out.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for saying hello back. It's always better when you have a responsive congregation. Can I encourage you, be responsive. It helps the preacher. Thank you very much. Maybe not that responsive, okay? No, it's great. And a big welcome as well to our television audience, wherever you may be in this world. Welcome to sunny, not Perth, Western Australia. It's not raining at the moment, is it? No. Okay, but welcome to our television audience as well, and welcome to all of you. Well, as you know, we've been looking at faith and we've learned a number of things about it. Like, for example, we know that it both involves what we believe as well as what we do. In other words, it includes both conviction and conduct, both truth and trust. It's a noun and a verb. And if it is trust, we've learned a few things. What sort of trust? Well, it's a reasoning trust. Faith isn't some sort of weird thing that floats out there like some sort of religious wishful thinking. Faith is a reasoning trust. It goes beyond human capacity to reason, but not against human capacity to reason. We also know it's a relational trust. It doesn't float out there. It's not faith in faith. It's faith in someone, not something, but someone, the God who we meet in the person of Jesus Christ. And it's also because it's that sort of faith, and because we're supposed to love this God with all that we are and all that we do, faith is therefore fully integrated. By it, we inform our heads, the intellectual and volitional sphere. By it, we enlarge our hearts, the emotional sphere. And by it, we also open and extend our hands, which is more the practical applicatory sphere. And we also know that faith is a sort of thing that forces you, it almost makes you jump out of the natural into the supernatural. And therefore, faith involves risk. When you take a step of faith, you're taking that profound step whereupon, on the basis of what we do know about God, because he has revealed himself to us, we take the profound step of therefore trusting him with the stuff we don't know and the stuff we can't control. That's Christian faith. And we've been looking at all of these principles and practices of faith, but now we've shifted our attention this month to people of faith. And we're going to start looking at some of the heroes of the faith, people who are great examples to us. Now, when we do that, we're going to find some in the Bible, and have been, and also find some people from outside of the Bible, but who are deeply impacted by what's in the Bible. And as we do that, we're going to be looking at, because you don't want to just take anyone, even a biblical character, and say, yeah, he's in the Bible, therefore I should be like him. He's an example. Not always. I mean, when I was a 10-year-old and used to fight regularly with my three brothers, I think I would have looked at Cain and said, yeah, he's a good example. He killed his brother. I really understand. I'd like to kill my brothers. You don't just take anyone. Just carte blanche, as though, oh yeah, he's in the Bible, therefore he's a good example of faith. Not everyone in the Bible is a good guy or a good girl. Now, I think Paul absolutely nailed this in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Let's look at the verse. He said, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. His point simply is that we follow others only to the extent that they follow Jesus Christ. Do you follow? Do you get my little follow joke there? Anyway, move on. Okay, well, today I want to talk to you about two other people, but one in particular. Now, the two people are Paul and Timothy, and the one I really want to focus on is the latter, Timothy. In a spiritual sense, these two are like father and son. Now, as parents, if you are a parent, we teach our kids all sorts of things, don't we? I mean, I mentioned the other day how I have taught my daughter Elizabeth when she was a very young girl, all the way through to now she's 12, but taught her things like, people are more important than things. And Elizabeth learnt it so well, she now repeats it back to me. How annoying. Because I'll be watching the news or watching something that's really important, like the Ashes or the Tour de France and things like that, and my lovely daughter will say, Dad, and she wants to speak to me, and I'll say, yeah, look, Tour de France on, come on, priority. And she'll say, Dad, people are more important than things. So annoying being reminded by your children, isn't it? But then again, healthy in some ways. I have to laugh when I think about my own father and some of the things that he perhaps ingrained in me. Now, one of the things he taught me how to do was how to fish. My dad loved fishing. He was a passionate angler. He was the sort of person who just thought it was sensational to go fishing. It was how he relaxed. He was a pastor and he would relax by fishing. But boy, when you see him fish, you didn't think he was relaxing much. He'd whoop and holler and yell and scream. He used to love it, engage. And because he loved it, it sort of rubbed off on us. So I learned how to fish by my dad. And that actually, when I was thinking about that, it reminded me, you remember last week Paul Morrison gave us that little Chinese proverb. Do you remember the one? If you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach him how to fish, you feed him for many days. But as Paul morphed it a bit, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, his wife won't see him for many days. Okay? And when he said that, it actually reminded me, I remember one of those sayings, used to get it on posters years ago. You probably will recognise it. You know the saying, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back, it's yours. If it doesn't, it never was. Do you remember that? Oh, so soppy, isn't it? I saw it once years ago. It was actually on a T-shirt a guy was wearing. And number one, I was concerned why a guy had this on his T-shirt, let me tell you. But number two, as I read it, I realised why. On his T-shirt it had, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back, it's yours. If it doesn't, hunt it down and kill it. And I thought, that's sensational. That is sensational. But anyway, back to my father. So he used to teach me how to fish. He also taught me how to do leg spin bowling. Now, for our television audience, cricket, as we all know, is the sport of kings. And in it, there is a particular bowl called a leg spin, where you spin the ball from right to left. And Dad used to play cricket with us in the backyard of our home. And he used to introduce these leg spin. I'll never forget the day he introduced me to the legendary googly. The wrong un. This is a ball that spins the opposite of what's supposed to spin. And I still remember him, this ball fizzing toward me in the air, thinking, oh, it's going to spin away from me. And as I went forward to get to the pitch of the ball, and I did the complete opposite and went that way and took out my leg stump. I've never forgotten that lesson. Beware of googlies. So my father taught me about fishing and cricket. Now, as wonderful as they are, there are other things that are more profound. Now, Timothy was taught something else far more profound by Paul and worked with Paul as a spiritual father and son. Let's look at this verse together, found in Philippians 2:22. But you know, this is Paul speaking, but you know that Timothy has proved himself because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. In 1 Corinthians 4, Paul calls Timothy the son whom I love. In 1 Timothy 1, it's my true son. In 2 Timothy 1, it's my dear son. Now, Paul wrote 2 letters to Timothy, 1st and 2nd Timothy, and they're part or 2/3 of what we call the pastoral letters, the pastorals. The other one is Titus. They're called pastorals because they're written by a pastor to a pastor with a lot of pastoral issues being addressed, hence the name. But remember, that word is a very religious word, as I know, pastor this, pastor that. It just came about, the original word poimen in Greek means shepherd. Now, the reason why we use the word pastor is because of a guy called John Calvin. In the 16th century, using the Geneva Bible, he used the Latin word in the Geneva Bible for poimen, shepherd. Guess what the Latin word is for shepherd? Pastor. And it stuck. And so when John Wycliffe and William Tyndale and other translators into English came along, pastor was well known and well used, so they used the Latin term in our English translations. And that's why we nowadays say pastor. But it originally meant a shepherd. And this is a shepherding type of group of letters, talking from a shepherd to a shepherd of the sheep of God. Now, these documents are very direct, they're very descriptors, there's guidance and instruction, there's advice, there's warnings, there's admonitions, encouragements. They're letters from a spiritual father to a spiritual son, Paul to Timothy. And they're also incredibly moving, particularly 2 Timothy. The reason why is because when 2 Timothy was written, Paul was under arrest in Rome and he was destined for execution, and he knew it. And so he wrote it. It was like his last will and testament, his last letter to the Timothy that he'd known and loved over so many years. Well, how did he get into this position of being in Rome, under arrest, in prison, about to be executed? Well, let's just flick into the History Channel for a moment. At the end of Acts, when he's under house arrest in Rome, he actually, we believe, got released there, continued to preach and teach. He wrote 1 Timothy and Titus, and then just prior to 2 Timothy, he was rearrested under the vicious persecution of a guy by the name of Nero. We're talking about 60 to 65 AD. Now, Nero was a guy who was incredibly vicious, and some people have actually made the interesting comment whereby they've said, isn't it interesting that people nowadays name their sons Paul and their dogs Nero? Gives you a bit of an idea of the type of person this guy was, a vicious sort of guy. And Paul writes from this context, if you like, knowing that his life is in danger. And this is why he writes things like this, 2 Timothy 4:7. I note the past tense, I have fought, not I am fighting, I have fought the good fight. I have finished, past tense, the race. I have kept, past tense, the faith. He knows he's facing execution. He knows his time is at an end, and that's when he writes. That's why it's a very moving document. When you put it into that historical context, it changes the way you read it. One of the early church fathers, a guy called, we nickname him the father of church history, a guy called Eusebius. He wrote that Paul was condemned to death by Nero and that he was beheaded just outside of Rome, a place called the Ostian Way. It's just a road, it's still there today, it just runs westward from Rome down to the coast. But interestingly enough, he also noted that at the same time, Peter, the apostle, who they believe had been at Rome at the same time, he also was executed, Paul and Peter together. But interestingly enough, because Paul was a Roman citizen, his was by beheading, but Peter was not a Roman citizen, his was by crucifixion. And the tradition is that he, at his own request, asked to be executed by crucifixion, inverted, upside down, because he felt he wasn't worthy to be crucified the same way as his Lord, right way up. Now, this isn't something that people have just sort of thought up. This is actually Eusebius wrote about this as well as others. For example, this is a guy called John Chrysostom writing in his homilies. Chrysostom was the Archbishop of Constantinople into the 4th century, and he wrote, "For Christ had been crucified, himself," meaning Paul, "was about to be beheaded. Peter was crucified with his head downwards, and these things they suffered from audacious and despicable men." If you're wondering why the unusual name John Chrysostom is transliteration of Chrysostomos, which means golden-mouthed, because he was a great preacher and was renowned at that time, hence the name John Chrysostom. Now, the reason I'm telling you this little history, little channel thing at the moment, is that just to impress upon us all that these were real people living in real lives in the real world. They were just normal people like you and I, and whether it was Peter, Timothy or Paul, they were marked by faith and they lived lives of faith. You remember Paul writing in Galatians 2:20, he wrote these words where he said, "The life I live in the body, I live by faith." And notice where the faith is, it's in the Son of God. So the life he lives in the body is lived by faith. And these guys, all of them, live lives of faith. And so it actually behoves us to actually look at them and say, okay, how did they live their lives? How does that impact upon me? Well, let's flick back from the History Channel now. Now, why were Paul and Timothy so close? Well, they'd been together for about 15 years. Now, assuming Timothy was about 20 when he hooked up with Paul and Silas at Lystra, we believe that at the time of the writing of these letters, particularly 2 Timothy, he would have been about 35 years of age. About 35 years of age. Paul had used him as a delegate on a few trips that he'd sent him on. Timothy had been with him on some of his missionary journeys. We believe Timothy had been with Paul when he was in Rome in his first imprisonment. And at the time of writing these letters, Timothy had been left in this place called Ephesus as a sort of embryonic bishop. His job was to set up the church, to organise the worship, to appoint the leaders, to oppose false teaching, to preach the gospel and teach from Scripture, to help the widows with the distribution of food, all of those sort of things. That was his job. That's why he'd been put there. And Paul sums all of this up in Philippians 2:20 with these wonderful words about Timothy, when he simply says, "I have no one else like him." No one else like him. So these guys were close, a father and a son in a spiritual sense. And now Paul's approaching his death. Execution is on its way, and a new burden of leadership is shifting from Paul to Timothy. Now, most of us think that when we hear about people like Timothy, we see them as giants, don't we? Spiritual giants, probably larger than life characters, maybe a strong type A personality, a natural leader, all those sorts of things, don't we? Well, nothing could be further from the truth in relation to Timothy. Timothy was a man upon whom leadership was thrust. He didn't seek it, it found him. Now, our own Phil Baker. Now, Phil's recovering, as you know. It's going to take some time for him to recover. Interestingly, Phil came into leadership in this church, Riverview Church. Leadership was thrust upon him. He didn't seek it, it was actually given to him. He was 28 years of age when leadership suddenly became his and became senior pastor of this place. I happen to think that's a really healthy way to come into leadership, because it avoids what the Bible calls selfish ambition or sinful ambition and vain conceit. It's a healthy way to come into leadership. Well, what I want to do is just share with you 3 quick points, 3 things that we can learn from the life of Timothy as it relates to Paul that'll help us to live our lives of faith. So are you with me? Yes. Great. Okay, here's point number 1. Faith transcends age. Faith transcends age. Transcends means literally to climb over, to go above and beyond. And faith can transcend age. Now, when we talk about age, we often have stereotypes of age, don't we? That, you can't hear and you're a bit slow and things like that. Well, I had 3 great jokes that I wanted to share with you, but 2 of them, my wife said she would leave me if I shared them. So I'm left with 1, and here it comes. This is talking about the stereotype of being hard of hearing. So there are 3 older gentlemen, they're walking down the road, and it was a bit of a breezy day, and the gentleman on the left, as they're walking together, he said, "Windy, isn't it?" And the guy next to him said, "No, it's not, it's Thursday." And the guy next to him said, "So am I, let's go and buy a Coke." Did you follow that? Oh, someone got it over here, well done. Well done. Claire got it, good job. I was actually in a service once, and the guy did this sensational, he was a Lutheran preacher, did this great joke, and I was sitting next to a good mate of mine, and the whole class fell apart laughing. And then about a full minute later, after we'd all quietened down, my friend suddenly burst out laughing because he suddenly got it. And I remember the preacher then started to laugh again because it was like a delayed... Anyway, let's move on. So faith, though, here can actually transcend age. Now, when we're talking about Timothy, this was a young guy. He was young. Now, assuming, as he was 20, that means he would have been about 35 when he actually received these letters. Now, in the ancient world, in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, there was just a dividing line. There were 2 types, 2 age groups, if you're a young person or an old person. And the dividing line, would you like to know? You're all a bit worried now, aren't you? You're going to be old or young. 40 was the dividing line. Hand up all the old guys, old people. Okay? Hand up all you young, sprightly... Oh, you stop your nonsense. We don't want any of that. Okay. But he was young. And Paul would speak to him about his youth. He'd say things like, "Flee the evil desires of youth, Timothy." Eugene Peterson translates that as "run away from infantile indulgence." The point they're making there is that Paul's simply saying, look, it doesn't matter if you're immature in years. That doesn't mean you need to be immature in character. I've met some people who you would say are mature in years, but are incredibly immature in character, and vice versa. I've seen young people who are incredibly mature in character. The point being here is we ought to be mature in character as we grow in grace and in the knowledge of our Lord. And Paul is talking to a young Timothy here, but note what he says about Timothy. Look at this in 1 Timothy chapter 4. He says, "Timothy, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and in purity." Faith can transcend age. It doesn't matter if you're young, it doesn't matter if you're old, it doesn't matter if you're middle-aged. Phil came into leadership here as a 28-year-old. It does not matter. Faith can transcend age, whether you're 8 or 88, 10 or 110. Faith does not need to be limited by age. You can live a vibrant life, empowered, marked by faith, no matter where you are on life's journey, chronologically speaking. I even have my daughter, speaking of Lizzie again, just recently she put a list up on our fridge door. Sorry, Lizzie, she's just over there and I'm embarrassing her as I speak. But she had this on the fridge door, just lists of things that Lizzie would like, thanks Mum and Dad. Now on the list would be things like, I want the new little rubber thing to cover my iPod to protect it, and I want some new clothes, and I'd like this or I'd like that. Just the normal things you'd expect from a 12-year-old girl. However, number one on the list was this, that Isabel's dad gets better. Now, the Isabel here is Isabel Baker. And Lizzie and Izzy, as I call her, are as thick as thieves. They're close friends. But it struck me, it marked me, and I went, wow, there's a 12-year-old, and number one on the list is that Phil Baker gets better. You can live a life of faith as a 12-year-old. You can live a life of faith. Whether you're 12 or 112, you can live a life of faith. Why? Because faith transcends age.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that message today. Hope it was encouraging, no matter what age you are, to know that you can be a hero of the faith. If you do want to encourage Phil and you've checked out the website, you can always send in an email to the church. And don't forget to tune in next week for the second part of Hayden's message on Timothy. Catch you then.
That's our prayer tonight. Come on, breathe on us, Lord.